Did you know that when you're buying astronomy or astrophotography equipment, you're effectively playing the lottery? In this video, we'll learn more about that. Hey guys, Quiv the Lazy Geek here and welcome back to my balcony. Today we're gonna look at what we call lovingly in the community the equipment lottery. And this is something that beginners to astronomy, astrophotography need to be aware of. And this is something that I think photographers are very familiar with, especially when we're talking about lens-to-lens variability for the same lens model. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In astrophotography, we have different pieces of equipment that work together into a beautiful seamless ballet, which is the epitome of beauty, the elegance of which is unmatched in the whole universe. But with that ballet, anything that goes wrong will completely mess the whole scene up. And we don't want that happening, do we? But the problem is the lottery of the equipment will sometimes make this happen. So here we have a standard, although expensive, astrophotography rig, but the principle is pretty much the same for most rigs. And we have a mount that will point towards the stars and track the stars. As the Earth rotates, we need to compensate for that rotation. The mount will do that. We have the optical tube assembly, also known as telescope, that will actually gather light. And we have here, for me, the cameras at the front here, which will capture that light. I have some corrective lenses in between the telescope and the camera. It's a system called Hyperstar, but we have similar things like focal reducer or field flatteners for some other systems. At the butt of the telescope here, in my case, I have a focuser, an electronic focuser, which I use to autofocus throughout the night as the temperatures make the telescope expand and contract. Or if you're using a lens, it will make the actual glass of the lens expand and contract and just shift the focus point. And we're very sensitive to focus in astrophotography. And at the top here, we have a small computer with also what we call a guide scope with a guide camera. Going back to the front, here I have a filter drawer with actual pieces of glass inside that basically filter out light. And with this kind of filters, I can pick and choose what frequencies of light will reach my camera, which has a lot of advantages. Now, with all of that equipment carefully dancing into that beautiful, elegant ballet, what could possibly go wrong? The answer is everything. Everything could possibly go wrong. Everything is a single point of failure. My life is horrible and I hate this hobby. But no, I love this hobby. But yes, it can be frustrating at times when things go wrong. And this is where the equipment lottery really comes in, because if you're buying a mount, there's a characteristic of the mount that we call the periodic error that will change from mount to mount sample, even of the same make, same brand, and even if they were made right one after another at the factory. And this is because that most mounts use a worm gear system to rotate the mount at the same speed as the Earth rotates to counteract that rotation. There are minute discrepancies in how well the worm gear is actually polished. And errors of just microns will translate into the mount tracking the star a bit too fast or a bit too slow. And over one period of that worm, where the worm will have done like a full rotation across all of its threads, we can see that the telescope will kind of speed up and then slow down and then speed up, and we get what we call periodic error graphs. And the same mount from the same manufacturer of the same make, same model, they will always have slightly different periodic error curves. And it's important to us because the flatter that curve is, the more of a straight line it is, the better the mount will track properly. And we have a system to take care of that, which is the guide scope at the very top of the telescope here, which is a secondary scope and camera that's locked onto a star and is following that star. And whenever it sees that the telescope is kind of deviating, it can tell the telescope like, hey, you should go back on track. And so it reacts to the periodic error by counteracting it immediately. There are other systems like encoders, preferably absolute encoders, but those can be very expensive. there are still other ways to deal with periodic error variabilities to buy a very, very expensive mount, and I mean very expensive, because they typically then have guaranteed back a periodic error width, basically. And that's one part of the lottery. And actually, like periodic error, even if it's quite large, as long as you're guiding, you can deal with it. But there are times when mounts will come with a periodic error curve that has sudden shifts. And those sudden shifts are actually very difficult to get rid of with standard auto guiding. And when you have a mount that does that, congratulations.
Congratulations.
You've lost the mount lottery. Good luck convincing your dealer to take it back. But they really should, because it means the mount is not usable for astrophotography. There is another piece of lottery that we have, which is the telescope itself. Now, for astrophotography, we love to have pinpoint stars across the whole field of view, preferably on a full-frame camera sensor. And it's actually extremely difficult to manufacture telescopes that can reliably do this kind of feat. And the telescope lottery is definitely real for those lenses, at least for the cheaper solutions. This particular telescope, the Celestron C6, for me it's an excellent sample of the C6. The reason it's excellent is because I bought it secondhand from a knowledgeable buyer who had measured it. And this is actually very important for this kind of Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope, or mirror reflectors telescope, mirror-based telescopes, like the smoothness of the mirror, the shape of the mirror, the aberrations of the mirror can be measured quite precisely with what we call a star test. And for planetary observing, for visual observation, or even imaging, like people can get really, really into the details about such things. And there are actually, like, there was a series of those Celestron telescopes in Japan a couple of decades ago, where a Japanese reseller was matching the very best mirrors and corrector plates and selecting just those samples and selling them for a higher price. They called that the EX series. And yeah, it was a great business model. You have companies like Company 7 in the US, I believe, which does the same kind of tests. And then you have another solution to avoid this kind of lottery, is just buy from the most expensive manufacturers. So like there are Takahashi telescopes and lenses from Japan that have excellent reputations, although sometimes even them can produce lemons. So the lottery is absolutely real. I actually bought a lens from a company called Ascar that's supposed to be great for full-frame cameras. When I tested it, my star shapes were terrible. I returned it, they sent me a new lens back, but this time, while the star shapes were awesome, the threads at the back of the lens, the pitch was not quite right, so I was not able to use most of my adapters with it, and I had to send it back. It's currently back at the reseller, and they're fixing it. So yeah, lottery there, and when there is such lottery, it's always better to notice those issues quickly, but it can be quite difficult. The next piece of equipment that I want to talk about in terms of the lottery is the focuser here at the back, that I have at the back of the telescope. Focusers are very simple mechanisms, and they come with backlash. The focuser backlash is a value that will depend, even for the same brand, same make, same model, same everything. You'll have different backlash in your focuser, and the backlash is the amount of play there is in the focuser. When you reverse direction, how long will it take for the focuser to finally start moving after you've told it to move? Now, fortunately for focusing, we have some very efficient ways of dealing with that backlash. One of the most efficient way is called the overshoot backlash compensation. This is what software like Sequence Generator Pro or Nina use, along with other possible techniques. So it's a bit of a lottery, but it's not the end of the world. This one can be very easily remedied by software. Now, if you have something else in your focuser, something we call slippage, I've never seen that, so I don't think it really happens with the lottery, but if you do get a bad sample of the focuser that actually slips, or whose backlash seems to change randomly, then you have a lemon and you've been victim of the equipment lottery. Now let's go to the camera. So we have my main imaging camera here, I have a guiding camera there, and it so happens that in my experience the cameras suffer from much less equipment lottery, besides having downright lemons with like oil leaking on their sensors. But that's, you know, something else. The cameras themselves, I'd say like the clearest example I've seen of camera lotteries were cameras with a very specific sensor, like the 294 series of cameras. When you use them with red narrowband filters, or filters that have a narrow red bandpass in H-alpha or alpha 2, for example, different sensors will have different patterns on the camera, and some patterns may be more easily to calibrate out. And my own 294 camera, when I had it, had a particularly bad pattern, but apparently now it's enjoying retirement in a Bartle 2 zone in New Zealand. So that camera that I used had a happy end of life. But that's basically the main pieces that I have for the equipment lottery. There's one last one, which is the filter. And filters, especially narrowband filters, can very much be the victims of the equipment lottery. Let's have a look inside. So for filters, there is a lot of opportunity to have lottery and equipment lottery, because filters, there's multiple criteria. They have to pass light very well at the frequencies of light, or the wavelength of light that are desired, and they have to block light very well outside of those frequencies. And especially when we're talking about narrowband filters, they're difficult to manufacture, and therefore they have variability. And it's one of the reasons why people were buying extremely expensive Astrodon branded filters, because they know that there is a large amount of quality control, and that filters that are not up to specs just don't make the cut. But if we look at other brands, that's not always the case. And one of my subscribers from Poland, Grzegorz, told me about a guy on a Polish forum who measures multiple filters, multiple samples of the same filter brand and model. And he measured a variety of filters, but we're looking at our victime du jour, which is Optolong L-eXtreme. In my recent videos, you have seen that my L-eXtreme worked shockingly well at my fast focal ratio of f2. And it didn't for other people like Astro Blender. And this is because of the filter lottery. And here I have results for a specific sample of an L-eXtreme measured by that guy in Poland. And the y-axis is the transmittance, overall transmittance of the filter, and the x-axis is the wavelength of light that is being transmitted. And you can see that in this particular L-eXtreme filter we have two main bandpasses of oxygen 3, and they're represented as two green bars here. And what we're seeing is that the strongest of the two is actually almost at the center of the bandpass, which is good. But the weakest of the two, but still not that weak, it's roughly typically about 1/3 of the strength of the other oxygen 3 bandpass, is actually almost completely rejected by that particular filter. And we can also see what happens in H-alpha for that particular filter. We can see that it passes H-alpha itself quite well. It is the red line here, but it's still a bit like around 80%. Whereas here we have a transmittance of over 90% that is not matched really to any wavelength that we're interested in. And we have some N2 wavelengths as well, like those blue ones here, that also get passed, which are good for things like planetary nebulae. And when you increase focal ratio on those filters, you'll start seeing more differences, because both band passes, especially the H-alpha, so the bottom one, will be shifted to the left. And so you can expect that as you make the focal ratio faster, you will shift the band to the left, so that this oxygen 3 bandpass will suddenly become stronger at faster focal ratios. And that's where really a lot of lottery can happen. And this guy actually has measured this particular filter, where you can see one of the oxygen 3 bands here, which I believe is this one on the left, at high focal ratios, at slow focal ratios, there's very little transmission. But as you keep shifting the curve to the left with faster focal ratios, it transmits more and more. But at the same time, which is not bad at all, we then suddenly get a big drop in H-alpha, and we also get an increase in H-alpha at some point here, and I believe it's because of this bump that we see on the right side that gets shifted, and when it gets shifted enough, this bump will also decrease a little bit while it shifts, but it will coincide with the H-alpha wavelengths here. And you won't see exactly the same behavior with other filters, even the same brand and same make, because they're all slightly different. And here we're looking at another example of the Optolong L-eXtreme. It's same brand, same make, but the curves look different. You can see H-alpha is the red thing here. It's properly passed, but the N2 on the right is no longer passed. Compared to the previous filter. There's a difference in centering. What this also means is that as the band passes will be shifted to the left, we're going to lose H-alpha almost immediately, which is terrible, and which is what has happened to people like Astroblender in their video. And if I look on the left-hand side band pass, we'll probably see a very similar behavior than the previous filter, except that the main oxygen 3 band pass or wavelengths is on the right of the filter, so it will get cut off quite quickly as the band passes shift to the left, but will recover the weaker oxygen 3 wavelengths on the left hand side. It's the same filter make and brand, but it behaves completely differently. And we can look at other charts of different samples of that filter, and we have these two L-eXtreme filters that look to be absolutely exceptional. They have high transmittance across the whole breadth of available focal ratios, with the focal ratios available here at the x-axis, and even at f2 we get a huge amount of transmittance. Now this is for refractors, so we'll get worse results with a central obstruction, as I covered in the previous video, which I'll link to above. But still, those samples of the L-eXtreme look absolutely amazing. The lottery has worked in that case. But you can also get samples that are a bit more average, like this one, which is, pretty good until you get to around f4.9. So it would be great for a red cat telescope, for instance. And it's very good because this is actually Grzegorz's filter, and he uses it with a red cat. And yes, we can see how the filter lottery is there. And even for broadband filters like the L Pro, we can see differences in transmittance depending on the filter sample that you get. And that is the lottery with filters. So overall, we can see that the equipment lottery is absolutely real, and it affects multiple parts of our equipment. And unfortunately, there is no real way to avoid the lottery. I would say one of the ways to avoid the equipment lottery when it comes to mounts, for example, is to go with mounts that have proven themselves over time to be reliable and to be consistent. And I bought one of my mounts based on that premise. My EQ6R mount from Skywatcher has a great reputation for being a docile mount that is a bit heavy for its payload capacity, but provides smooth periodic error curves that are easy to guide out, and it performs just as advertised. There's been other mounts that might have more variability, with some samples being exceptional. I won't name anyone because I don't have hard evidence, but that's like what happens with mounts. And when you want to absolutely avoid the lottery, you have to pay over $5,000 for a premium mount, and that's one of the reasons why so many people buy premium mounts, because once they buy a premium mount from like Astrophysics or 10 micron or Paramount or these kind of brands, well, they're set for life. It's just going to work, and they're sure not to get a lemon. The same goes for optical tubes. And when we go into the filter territory, well, there's not much you can do except, if you really care about the consistency of the filters, is to buy from a brand that has an excellent reputation, like Astrodon, although they've been bought by another company since I bought my filters from them, so I don't know how well they do now. Or I think some filters with excellent reputation is Chroma, or otherwise you really need to get them measured via spectrometer. It's really very much a lottery, which is a bit depressing, isn't it? Now, for me, I'm very happy because my Altair dual band filter didn't perform as well as my L-eXtreme, but overall, it performed quite decently for such a narrow bandpass. Whereas my L-eXtreme, I feel like I've gotten an excellent sample, definitely better than Astro Blender's sample, where I get really high transmission for both H-alpha and oxygen 3, even with my reflecting telescope at f2 with a huge central obstruction. Sometimes I'm lucky, sometimes I'm not. And that's pretty much all that I wanted to cover in this video. So the equipment lottery, it's real. There are ways it can be remedied, but not completely. So good luck when you buy equipment. Always pray for good equipment, but more importantly, try to test the equipment as much as possible, as quickly as possible, so that if you have a huge issue with it, you can return it quickly. And with that, that's it for this video. I hope you found it interesting. And as always, if you like this video and if you're interested in astronomy, astrophotography, you may want to consider subscribing to my channel, leaving a comment, leaving a like or a dislike on the video, and clicking that bell icon to be notified when new videos come up. As always, don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.